school because they never open the doors early enough. And when it gets really cold, people will be out there shivering in front of the door, and like made me angry. So they changed how they open up a little bit. Looks as though they're. Oh, come on.
Professor Hunt?
Yes, ma'am. I'm looking at an empty room.
Yes, sir. We're going to be taking the PSAT today.
Okay. I'm doing this class. I may be talking to a wall. Well, I've got at least 2 or 3 students in my room. I'll record it so they can see it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We have nervous energy this morning? The reason I ask questions like that is because I had training years ago to read body English and things like that, so I could tell if people were fibbing to me or if people were upset or nervous or whatever, because it was part of my job to be able to tell those things. I also, sometimes people get worried because I say, what ethnic group is your name from, and things like that. And the reason is, I also try and identify people by facial structure and things like that, because that's some of the things that we were taught while I was working. And I'm very, very interested in that. Sometimes, for example, people speak English with different accents, and I've got to where I can recognize what country they're from by the accent of their English. For example, you spend time in Africa, and a lot of African languages have very, very melodic sounding voices. It's just nice to listen to them, but they're a little bit different depending on the influence that they had from colonial powers or what have you. So, another thing I've noticed when I was in Africa and other places in Asia, people who spoke English usually spoke more correct English than we do. Why is that? Because it's not their mother tongue. They don't speak it at home with mommy and daddy, so they never have a really relaxed version of English the way we do. You may not notice it, but when you come into school, you speak a different language than you speak at home. Believe it or not, I mean, because at home you're speaking a comfort language, the language that you always heard when you were a baby, and then you start changing that a little bit as you go to school. And one of the things that teachers try and teach you, sometimes fail, is written English also is a different language. And there are acceptable standards, and there's things that we say in everyday language that don't fit in written English, especially for college work, that sort of thing. So every once in a while you'll notice me making some comment about it. It's not discouraging anyone or anything. It's just, that's how the brain's working. We were talking about, and I'll get the slides up here so that you all can see them, those of you who are here. We were talking about kind of what we had at the beginning of our country, and even talked about some of the early laws that were passed and things like that. And I think last time we talked even a bit about the Bill of Rights. And take this opportunity to mention that Quiz 5, the much sought after Quiz 5, I've been getting emails from everybody. Where's Quiz 5, Mr. Hunt? Gee, I didn't know you liked taking quizzes that much. It's up. And the readings are up. The adjusted readings that fit Quiz 5 are up there. So I'm not asking you to have it done on Friday, I'll ask you to have it done by the end of the day on Monday, since I'm a little bit late with that. There were other things that were more important to me, like dealing with the exam and that sort of thing. So, somebody tell me, he's famous now, especially in the last 5 years. He was always famous, but not so much for young folks. Somebody tell me who the protege of George Washington was that followed him through the war step by step and had bright ideas, and he's not even from Virginia. He's not even a Virginian. In fact, he wasn't even actually born in the continental United States. Who am I talking about?
Protege of George Washington?
Of George Washington.
Alexander Hamilton?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we all know the show Hamilton, which distorts history a little bit, but it mentions people that did exist in history. And I haven't seen the show Hamilton, and maybe I should.
It's really good.
Is it good?
Yeah.
Do they go down to the duel when he gets shot?
Against Aaron Burr?
Yeah.
Yes.
They go all the way to him getting killed, which really upsets me, and it illustrates a point that very, very smart people can also be very, very
They have,
stupid.
like 3 duels within the span of the show.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The
Oh.
one is, the first one is 2 American soldiers.
2 American soldiers.
Yes. And then.
Can you guys hear that out, what we're saying here? Post or Telica, can you hear our conversation? Yes, wave your head, no. Hello, Earth's Calling Post. Front row, guy in a red shirt, wave your hand so I know you're alive. Everybody in the back row, shit, there you go. I knew he was alive. That took a lot of arm twisting. Could you hear the student in this room talking a minute ago? No? Yes? You don't have to answer me, just nod your head. How about you guys in Telica? Could you hear it? Can you hear what I'm saying right now? Somebody in the back row is waving their hands. What's wrong with the front row? Don't you have hands? Are your hands too cold? Are you sitting on them? Oh, hello, Mr. Hunt. I guess maybe you're looking at the student in the middle of my room and wondering who he is. Here I am. Okay. We were talking about Alexander Hamilton and the fact that he's the subject of a musical which has some aspects of truth to it and some aspects that are kind of made up because they made better sense for a musical. But he was very important early on. You could call him the father of our American economy. He was probably also a little bit hyperactive, and I can imagine him driving George Washington slightly around the bend with his ideas all the time, because he was young. George Washington was getting older and tired and had fought an 8-year war and was ready to go rest. And Hamilton keeps telling him, I've got this idea, I've got that idea. And once they're in office, George Washington says, you have all these ideas, don't tell them to me, tell them to the Congress. That's your job, you're Secretary of the Treasury. And so indeed he did. And he made 4 reports in between January of 1790 and December of 1791. He made 4 reports related to the economy. Let me see if I can get slides up so that I can show you the general. What I'll do is I'll put on a PowerPoint called the Federalist Presidents. Where is it? Looks like it's down at the bottom of the pile somewhere. It disappeared. You have it. You have it in your notes anyway. Hello. I think what I did was I moved it over into your notes and I didn't leave it in my notes. That's terrible. Okay, we don't need them. We'll go without them. Alexander Hamilton made his first report in January of 1790. It was a report on public credit. Here's what you need to remember about the report on public credit. He made 2 reports on public credit. This is the first one. He wanted to fund the federal debt at face value. What does that mean? Well, the federal government had sold bonds. The federal government owed people money. The federal government had paid soldiers with kind of IOUs from the federal government. And what he's insisting is that all of this be redeemed with cold, hard cash. And not a portion of it, but all of it. So if the government owed you $100, then they paid you $100 and not a discount rate or anything like that. And his point was, if we don't do that, no one will trust us and no one will give us credit, including our own people. They won't trust our money. And we had some pretty major debts. We owed foreign countries. Back then, it was a lot of money. Nowadays, people would laugh at it. We owed foreign countries $11 million, which is probably approaching $1 trillion in modern money. It was a lot of money, at least in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Domestically, the government, the Continental Congress, had borrowed money from a lot of people, like Robert Morris and other people. They owed about $41 million domestically in the country. Who else did they owe money to? Anybody? Who got little certificates that said, this is your month's salary on a little piece of paper, but it wasn't money? Who got that? Anybody? I'm looking at Tahoka. Somebody answer for him. Who's hiding behind us? Or notes?
France.
No, I'm talking about who did we owe in this country? What particular kind of people did we owe money to? We've been paying them with chits all along, and they were kind of worthless.
Right.
One whole class of people, a very important class of people during the American Revolution, the soldiers. Yeah, somebody said it. You said it. I heard you saying it. Okay, yeah. And what did the soldiers do with those things? You couldn't buy anything with them. So they were selling it to anybody that would give them some money for it. Let's say I have a chit that says, Uncle Sam owes you $1. I'd sell it for 25 cents just so I could get cash to send home. Which means there's a whole class of people that have been going around buying these chits at way, way below the face value, which is a problem. Because Alexander Hamilton wants to pay off all this kind of debt at face value. Can you think of a controversy this might start? Because the people that are holding all that paper aren't the soldiers anymore. It's a bunch of speculators. It's a bunch of war profiteers. Some people said, Alexander Hamilton, you just want us to pay it off at face value because your friends bought up all those chits. And they're going to slip you a little money on the side. I bet they didn't have that in the musical Hamilton, did they? No. I don't think he did that. I think he was dead serious about the reason for that. You have to pay your debts off, or you won't have any credit. No one ever proved any wrongdoing anyway. He also wanted to do something else. He wanted for the federal government to assume the war debts of all the states. In other words, each state spent a certain amount of money. Remember, Congress couldn't tax. All they could do was beg. So the states had to supply their own militia and all that sort of thing. Each state had run up debts during the war, 8 years of war. And he said the federal government should just pay off all the war debts and we'll all start with a clean slate. And once again, this caused a little bit of a rumble because there were some states who'd already paid off all their debts. Mainly the southern states. Why could the southern states pay off their debts and the northern states couldn't? This is thinking day. I know it's early, but think. Give me an idea. Why do you think the southern states were able to pay off their debts, but the northern states couldn't? It has to do with how they made their money. The southern states still had their fields, still had their crops, still had their slaves. The northern states did business with trade, small manufacturing, but mainly trade and that sort of thing. And that was dead during the war. And their shipping was pretty much wiped out during the war. So they didn't have the means to pay their debts. So the southern states are saying, wait a minute, we don't owe any money. You're going to take our tax money and give it to pay off the debts of the northern states. We don't like that. There's going to be a fight over that. But that was his presentation. And by the way, he didn't think public debt was a bad thing. He didn't think it was bad for the government to owe money. That was one way. It's a little complicated, and I'm not your economics teacher, but that's one way you back money, is with debt. I know that sounds kind of hard to believe, but our money isn't backed with gold or silver anymore, is it? Our money is just based on the promise that you get this much money's worth for this piece of paper. The paper's not worth anything. Pull out a $100 bill. I don't know, worth 1/10 of a cent, maybe 1/100 of a cent in paper value. But we all know it's got this value, and we all believe in it. And that's what he was worried about. If you don't pay your debts off and all of that, nobody's going to believe in your paper. Okay. A while later, he's going to make a second report on public credit. And this time, he's going to suggest ways that we could make money for the federal government. Of course, one way we were already able to make money was selling land. Land that was controlled by the federal government. But he thought maybe we could put an excise tax, that's an internal tax, on alcoholic beverages, on liquor. Everybody liked to drink back then, so why not tax it? You can make a lot of money. And it's not so much like a personal tax, right? You don't drink, you don't pay the tax. That's also going to upset some people, but we'll talk about it a little bit later. Some people would think you're only attacking us, you're only attacking our industry, and nobody else is paying the bills. And they'll get angry. There's always going to be some disagreement. His third report, he says we need a national bank. Now our friend Robert Morris, the guy that funded most of the American Revolution, he started a bank. In the last years of the Revolution, they called it the Bank of North America. You might want to write that down. It didn't last very long because he really couldn't get the bank fully funded. He was trying to fund it as an institution of the government, but he couldn't get any money. In fact, Robert Morris said that asking the states for money was like speaking with the dead. Nobody seemed to hear you when you asked. He thought that a national bank would be responsible for issuing money, and so that we would have a stable currency that everyone trusted. That goes back to that credit thing, doesn't it? He thought that a national bank would be a source of capital for people that needed to borrow money to develop things like industry. And he was really big on development. That was his job, really, as Secretary of the Treasury at the time. He also thought that a national bank would be a safe place for the federal government to put its tax money and all of that until it needed to spend it. And it would also set up kind of an emergency fund for the federal government when they needed money quickly. Let me explain a little bit about the idea of a national bank. The idea of a national bank was that most of the money in it would be actually private money, just like a regular bank. Maybe 1/5 of the money in the national bank, according to his ideas, would actually be money that belonged to the government. His last report that he made late in 1791 was about industrial development. He called it his report on manufactures. Once again, you might want to write some of this down. The report on manufacturers, he listed some benefits we could get if we developed industry. One of the things that he said that we would do by developing industry was a diversification of labor. What am I talking about? I'm talking about there would be different kinds of jobs, many more types of jobs. I think last class we mentioned just in passing the problem with the South that's going to develop in the future is they had no diversity in labor. All they did was one industry, raise cotton. I mean, statistically speaking, that was it in the South. Of course, there were small things. And Hamilton thought we needed to have a diversified source of income and diversified labor. The other thing he thought was it would actually bring in more money. It would create more profit. He was also very interested in using modern technology. This guy's kind of ahead of his time. Wanted to use modern technology, thought that would be good for our country, good for developing our economy, making us a stronger country. And he thought that manufacturing would do that. And finally, and for people of your generation, this might sound counterintuitive, but he said we need industry because it will attract immigrants. We'll get more people into our country. We didn't have these problems with building walls and all that. We had problems with not enough people. We had this great big territory in the world, big hunk of the world, and if we couldn't fill it up with people, somebody might come take it away from us. We really needed more people to develop our economy. So those are the arguments he made. He himself tried experimenting with it. He started a group called SUM, S-U-M. It was the Society for Establishment of Useful Manufacturers. Hang on for a minute. I'm going to try a little trick here. So I can put this up here for you guys to see. I'm going down. Let me show you what I'm doing here. Come on, screen. There we go. There's the assignments for Unit 5. There's the readings. There's the lectures. I'm going to click on George Washington and the Federalists. Nope, it's the wrong one. I want the PowerPoint. The Federalists. The Federalist Presidents. If you want to follow along, you can put that one up. It's in your Unit 5 readings. I'm going to skip on down. It covers the Bill of Rights that we talked about last time. Talks about the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists a little bit. And then it talks about Alexander Hamilton's reports. So this is where you can find it in your PowerPoint notes. First report, second report, had some explanations about tariff, report on banking, report on manufacturers. This is a blueprint of his little experiment. He actually probably built the very first industrial park in the United States. It was on the banks of the Passaic River, up near some waterfalls in the Passaic River that's in New Jersey. Fast-moving river. The second largest volume of water going down that river, the only river with a higher volume of water was the Mississippi. It still is. He built canals off the Passaic River. Why? To run water wheels. The whole reason that the South had no industry and the North did was that the North had rapid running water because that was our only source of power. We didn't have electricity, we didn't have steam power, we didn't have any of that. And in this little industrial park that he built, Samuel Colt had his first gun factory. There were some textile mills and other businesses of that sort, all run by water wheel power. So early development of industry is all going to be where you have fast-moving water. I don't know if there's anything left of that place at all. I kind of doubt it, because it'd be really interesting to look at. Okay. Early on, Hamilton, with all of his visions and ideas, is going to get into conflict with James Madison. James Madison and Hamilton were two of the young men who really pushed getting us a constitution. But Madison is really more of an anti-federalist than a federalist. His reason for wanting a constitution was it will establish what the job of the federal government is, and it will limit it, protect the states from having the federal government overdo things. Hamilton wanted a constitution so that we could develop. One of those first arguments, and I mentioned it when I was talking about Hamilton's reports, assuming state loans from the war. And as I mentioned, Madison and friends, the Southern friends, they said, well, why should we help pay off the Northern states' debts? That's a no-go. You know, we're not going to do that. And so Hamilton wasn't a bad negotiator. He said, okay, let's do it this way. If we have to give Massachusetts and New York and those states money, however much money we give them, we'll also give the Southern states, even though they don't need it to pay debts anymore. Is that fair? Madison said, I still don't really like the idea. Hamilton added one more thing to sweeten the pot. You see, ever since the Philadelphia Mutiny, when the soldiers were trying to go over and beat up on the Continental Congress for not paying them, excuse me, we had realized that we needed to have a capital somewhere that didn't belong to any state. But the problem was we could never make up our mind where to do it. And so, while he's negotiating with Madison about assuming state loans, he says, would you go along with assuming state loans? Would you Southerners go along with that if we let you have the capital down there? And they agreed on that. And that was the deal. So the federal government assumed the state loans, and we got a capital on the banks of the Potomac River in between Virginia and Maryland. It's not deep south, but it's south. And it was right across the river from where George Washington lived. So, of course, he supported it too. That's called the Compromise of 1790. You might want to write that down. That brought us the whole District of Columbia. It wasn't just a city. Excuse me. Second argument he's going to have with Madison is over the National Bank. He's going to win this one. But Madison's doing the anti-federalist argument. What amendment to the Constitution says if something isn't specifically the right of the federal government, then it's the right of the states and the people? What amendment says that? Anybody, give me a number. Hint. Can you read in Roman numerals? That was a hint.
The X.
What's an X in Roman numerals?
10.
10. It was the 10th Amendment. They call that the States' Rights Amendment. So Madison threw that at Hamilton. Nothing in the Constitution mentions the word bank. You don't have the right to do banking. But Hamilton threw right back at him Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which was what we call the Necessary and Proper Clause. You might want to write that down. Article 1, Section 8. And what the Necessary and Proper Clause says, you can do what is necessary to do to carry out the duties that are delineated by the Constitution. So if the Constitution says you've got to go from point A to point B, maybe you're justified in having a road or having a horse to ride on or whatever. And that's the justification that the Federalists are going to use all along in this dispute about whether it's the right of the federal government to do it or the right of the state to do it. One significance of these two arguments is you're starting to see kind of a regional separation of points of view. Now, at the beginning, there were Federalists in the North and the South, and Washington was a Federalist, for sure, and he's from the South. But eventually it's going to look a little bit more regional. Let's talk about Washington. That's just a list of things that happened while he was president. Let's look at specifics. His foreign affairs were troubled by the British, and also by the French. First of all, Britain hadn't followed all of the rules of the Peace of Paris. They still had people out along our western borders and trading posts. They said it was just outside of our territory. We didn't really think so. We had problems with Spain too. They were on our southern border more or less. Their territory was south, and they were always wanting to creep up towards the north. At one point, they were claiming all the way up to the 34th parallel, which would have got them somewhere into Georgia, or maybe the southern part of South Carolina. We didn't like that. We claimed all the way down to the 31st parallel. We had trouble overseas. There was a strange typo in here. It says Barbara pirates. It's supposed to say Barbary pirates. And they were pirates along the northern coast of Africa, on the Atlantic coast and the Mediterranean coast, and they interfered with our trading ships that went over there to do business. While we still belonged to England, the Royal Navy protected our ships. When we no longer belonged to England, the Royal Navy just laughed when the pirates got our ships. They had it coming to them. You want independence? Okay, enjoy your independence. And these pirates would capture ships, take the cargoes, sell the cargoes, capture the crews, hold them for ransom, or make them into slaves to row their galleys. And we couldn't do a thing about it. We didn't have a navy. But George Washington had to deal with that. There's a slide for you guys out there. Another problem George Washington's going to have to deal with in foreign affairs are right about the same time that he's inaugurated President of the United States, France falls into the French Revolution. France was broke. England complained about all the money they'd spent, but France was legitimately bankrupt. Now, there were rich people in France who had a lot of money. The aristocrats had money. They could have done something to keep the country from being broke, but they wouldn't. Two groups. They separated their populace into three estates, three groupings of people. At the top, the aristocrats and the church. And then below, let's call it the business class. The people that really had to pay all the taxes and pay for the country. And the top two had wealth and land and all of those things, both the church and the aristocrats. And the bureaucrats were getting tired of paying for everything. Well, not the bureaucrats, but the class called the bourgeois. And eventually, the king and his advisors can't do anything about the country being bankrupt, that they're willing to do, and it's going to cause a revolution. In a way, the American Revolution caused it, but it wasn't the same reason. We didn't revolt because we were bankrupt. We revolted because we didn't want the British sticking their nose in our business affairs. That's going to cause us a problem. Let's talk about the problem a little bit. International relations. Who is our ally? Who is the country that we had the alliance with all the way through the American Revolution, or most of the way, after Saratoga anyway? France, right? Well, when their revolution breaks out, it's going to frighten all of the other countries around them. Austria, Prussia, England. Why? Why would the French Revolution upset all the other European countries? Somebody answer that question for me. I mean, it's a logical question. Because eventually they're going to throw the king out of office. Eventually they're going to execute the king. All the countries around them were all monarchies. They were all run by kings. You can imagine these kings going, whoa, I hope that disease doesn't spread to my country. Early on, Austria was the first country really to get upset about it. It had to do with a woman. The focus of all of our problems, right? Oh, I'm in trouble. Gender bias. She was directly related. She was the daughter of the Archduke of Austria. Her name was Marie Antoinette. She was Louis XVI's wife. And when things started turning bad, the Austrians tried to go and rescue her and get her out of France, and they failed. And eventually, as this revolution heats up in 1793 and becomes really, really vicious, they're going to dethrone the king, make him into citizen Louis Capet instead of Louis XVI. And they're going to execute him in January of 1793. And near the end of the year or early the next year, they're going to execute Marie Antoinette as well. And there's going to be a giant bloodbath, and we call it the Terror. And it lasted for about a year. One group gets in control, and then another group comes up and kills them off, and then another group comes. It's like a giant Pac-Man game, only it wasn't funny. And the French were making frequent use of the guillotine. You all know what a guillotine is, right? They called the guillotine Madame Guillotine. Whoops, there's gender bias again. It happens, what can I say? Tens of thousands of people were executed. We didn't want that to spread to our country, but we didn't want to get involved. And so George Washington very quickly said, we're not anybody's allies in this. We're staying neutral. And one of his advisors, Alexander Hamilton, said, we need to go to Congress and abrogate our alliance with France. We need to erase the alliance. Washington didn't want to go that far. He just wanted to kind of ignore the alliance. Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, advised President Washington, why don't we keep the alliance but use it as leverage against the British? So if they don't behave nicely towards us, we can remind them that, in theory, we should be allies of the French. Washington says, I don't want to play games with this. And he told the American people, we are neutral. We're not getting into this. The French were outraged because they thought we should be there helping them. The British didn't care. The British started taking our ships, 1793. If they saw one of our cargo ships going to France, they would capture the ship, take the cargo away, perhaps confiscate the ship. That was hurting us. Another thing the British were doing is they got into this fight deeper and deeper. And they were fighting the French, and it was all out war, and the Austrians and the British and the Prussians were all together trying to stop what was going on in France. The British started running out of sailors. Fighting a war like that, it's hard to keep your sailors, keep your Navy staff. And the thing that they really wanted the most was sailors who could speak English. And you'd never guess where they started getting their sailors from. A British ship would sail up to some American cargo ship. You got a big ship with 74 guns on it. When he says stop, you're going to stop. We're going to board your ship and inspect your crew because we think there's some deserters from the British Navy on your ship. And they would just go on American ships and just grab American sailors and put them in the Royal Navy. And discipline in the Royal Navy was pretty harsh. So if you were gone, you were gone. They're going to start doing that. So we're not happy. George Washington is trying to figure out something to do about this while remaining neutral. Now, we had an interpretation of what neutral meant. We're going to do business with everybody. We'll be everybody's friends. We won't get involved in the fighting. Some people didn't agree with that. France sent over an ambassador. Now, the French had these different groups, one after the other, that took over control of the revolution. One group was called the Girondins. They were kind of moderate, if anything was moderate in the French Revolution. And they sent over a representative to the United States to be their ambassador. And you have to understand how that works. I don't know if you all understand that or not. You've probably seen movies where some guy commits a crime and then waves his passport and says, "I'm a diplomat, you can't arrest me." It doesn't exactly work that way. If you're a diplomat and let's say you're going to be the French ambassador to the United States, you take the papers that your government gives you, you go to the United States, you present them to the American government, they accept you, and then you're accepted as a diplomat in our country. It's not just holding on to a diplomatic passport that does the trick. The Frenchman that came over was a fellow by the name of Edmond Charles Genet. I think I've got him on here somewhere. Yeah, there he is on the slide. I'll put it up. Citoyen Genet means citizen Genet. During the Revolution, everyone was equal. There were no counts or earls or barons or anything like that. Everybody was a citizen. And that's how they addressed each other. It's kind of the way the communists addressed each other as comrade. The French addressed each other as citizen. And Genet came into the U.S. and didn't report to the U.S. government. He went straight to South Carolina and went in to recruit and arm American privateers to join the French fighting against the British. He commissioned 4 ships in total. Organized the American volunteers to go fight Britain's Spanish allies in Florida. Everywhere he went, he set up these little clubs. The Jacobin clubs. President Washington said, "Wait a minute. That's not the way diplomats behave. You're violating our neutrality." He complained to Thomas Jefferson. Even Thomas Jefferson complained about it. He went up to New York, and there's a society called the Tammany Society. And they welcomed him with open arms. They were anti-federalists, one and all. Later on, we'll start calling them the Democratic Republicans. How is this resolved? Jefferson finally, as Secretary of State, told Citizen Genet, knock it off. When Genet does it, he's declared persona non grata. What's that mean? Anybody? Persona non grata just means you're unwelcome. You're an unwelcome person. And usually, even in modern times, if a government, we call it P&G, if a government P&Gs you, they'll tell you, you got 72 hours to get out of this country. After that, we will no longer recognize you as a diplomat. And you could go to jail. Citizen Genet was told, probably not 72 hours, they didn't have airplanes in, things like that. We want you to go back to France. We don't want you here. And a strange thing happened to Citizen Genet. While he was in America, the Girondins were kicked out of the government, and the Montagnards, another group, took over the government, and they were very interested in seeing Citizen Genet. Probably they wanted to set him up with an appointment with Madame Guillotine. And he begged the American government, please don't make me go. Probably one of our earliest cases of political asylum. And they said to him, okay, you can stay in America, behave, knock off all the violations of our neutrality, then you can be a private citizen. He did even better than becoming a private citizen. He went up to New York, got cozy with the daughter of the governor of New York, George Clinton, married her, and then he had the right to stay in America. And he behaved himself, as far as I know, for the rest of his life. Although he kind of faded away from history then. But what we're having here is Washington having a problem with maintaining neutrality. Eventually, what he's going to do, he's going to take one of our diplomats aside by the name of John Jay. He'd been our representative over in Spain, but he's going to give him a new job. He's going to put him in charge of our negotiations with the British. He's going to send him over to England and say, I need you to settle this problem with the English taking our sailors and the English taking our ships. And we also want to get the English out of the western places that they're in on our western border. We also want the English to stop getting in our way when we try and do business in the Caribbean. And we also want the English to pay us back for all the slaves they freed during the American Revolution. I think they probably freed in excess of 4,000 slaves down in the South. John Jay goes over there and he doesn't get exactly what George Washington wants. Yes, the British agree, we will pull out of all those trading posts out west. Give us 2 years. Yes, we will pay you back for all the ships we've taken in between 1793 and 1794. No, we will not pay you for the slaves. You have to help us regain the money people owe us from before the revolution. We will let you trade in the Caribbean. You have to agree, now listen to this, you have to agree to the British interpretation of neutrality. What was our interpretation? I told you a minute ago, we'll trade with everyone, we'll be friendly to everyone. Britain's interpretation was, if you want to be totally neutral, don't trade with anyone. That is not going to be popular in America. John Jay comes back with this proposed treaty, gives it to the president. The president's not really happy. John Jay says, that's the best I could get for you. So finally, Washington shrugs and takes it to the Senate and gets it ratified. And at least the British stop attacking our ships. On the sly, they're still taking our sailors. And they're still messing around the borderlands. John Jay was not popular in America when he came back. He joked that he could ride through the countryside at night by the light of his effigy burning in town squares all across the country. One other country we had problems with were the Spanish. They were down along our southern border claiming more territory than we wanted them to have. And Washington is going to send another diplomat out. Let me find him. There's a slide on it. Put it up for you. By the name of Thomas Pinckney, South Carolinian. Big family, the Pinckneys. He's going to go over to Spain, and he's going to negotiate about our southern border. And the Spanish are much more willing to negotiate than the British were with John Jay, because they don't have very many people over there to protect their territory. So they agreed that our border will be on the 31st parallel, 31 degrees north. They also agreed to stop blocking the Mississippi, which they've been doing ever since the end of the Revolution, and said, you're free to use the facilities in the city of New Orleans. And both sides promised to stop paying Indians to go across the border and kill people on the other side of the border. Apparently we were doing it too. Probably some of our Georgian friends were doing it. That treaty, when it comes back to America, it's either called Pinckney's Treaty or it's called the Treaty of San Lorenzo. That treaty will be very popular, and it'll make Thomas Pinckney kind of a hero. But the result of all this stuff, there, by the way, is some maps that you can look at if you want, showing the different territorial claims. There's domestic issues that George Washington's going to have to deal with, and we don't have time to talk about them this time, so we'll start out next time. We're going to have to settle an Indian war. We're going to have to settle a rebellion about taxing alcohol. And we're going to have to settle, or try to settle, problems of regionalism, where the North is starting not to like the South and vice versa, and the West is starting not to like the East. All of these things are troubling to George Washington because they influence our unity. So we'll start up next time doing that. In the meantime, take a look at the assignments, Unit 5 assignments if you haven't already, and get into that quiz. Okay? Also, there's another part of that assignment that some of you have probably overlooked. It's about number 4 on the list, and it says, have a shot at answering question 1 on your essay, on your book, so that I can see how you're doing. Read the instructions in the assignment. We're running out of time. Thank you very much. Have an absolutely wonderful day. And I will see you on Friday. Those of you that I've seen today.
Don't we have a small break on the 15th?
That's not this Friday though, is it?
It's the 13th.
Yeah, so it is the 15th. Huh. Maybe I won't see everybody on Friday. So I will have to send out a message. All these schools are doing Have a great day, guys.
Your conference is scheduled to end in 2 minutes. Your conference is now over. Goodbye.